What's up, guys?
I'm Peter.
And I'm Jez.
And with the Bible in between us, this is
the PB&J Show.
So, we got a letter today that I think is really important.
Really? Let's hear it.
Yeah, okay. So, it says, Dear Peter and Jez, my dad lost his job last year, so my family had to move across the country for his new job. It was really hard to leave all my friends, and I miss them every day. Now I'm in a new school, and I feel like I don't fit in, and I get picked on a lot. I've tried to make friends, but it just feels hopeless. What should I do? Julie. Wow. It's really tough, Julie. I'm sorry that you're going through that.
Yeah, I've been through a similar situation myself. You're in a new town, you've got new teachers, you're trying to make new friends. It can all be so overwhelming.
Yeah, but you know what, Julie? God can take really difficult circumstances and turn them into something good. Here, check out this story about Joseph, and you'll start to see what I'm talking about.
God's story, Joseph. So part of God's story is about a guy named Joseph, and it begins like this. Once there was a guy named Joseph who had 10 older brothers and one younger one. When Joe was a boy, he was his dad's favorite. In fact, his dad liked him so much better than his brothers that he gave Joe a special gift to prove it. You can imagine this made his brothers jealous. And Joe only made things worse. He told his brothers about dreams he had where he was ruling over them. Well, this made Joe's brothers furious. One day they were working and saw Joe coming. They said, "Here comes that dreamer." They threw Joe into a dark pit. They might have left him there forever, but they met some men traveling from Egypt and sold Joe to them as a servant instead. They thought that was slightly nicer than leaving him in a pit. Then they went home and told their father Joe had been killed by a wild animal. This broke their dad's heart. Kids, these brothers were really bad news. Selling a sibling is never a good idea. Ever. But the Bible says the Lord was with Joe. When Joe was a servant, he worked for a really important rich guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar liked Joe so much, he put him in charge of the whole house. Joe was happy until one day he was blamed for something he didn't do, and Potiphar sent him straight to jail. Well, God was still with Joe, even in prison. The guard decided he liked Joe so much, he put him in charge of all the other prisoners. Then God gave Joe special knowledge about dreams. When two prisoners had dreams, Joe knew what they meant, so he told them. 2 years later, Egypt's ruler called Pharaoh had a dream, and nobody knew what it meant. But by now, one of the two prisoners Joe had helped was out of jail and working for Pharaoh. He told Pharaoh about Joe, and God helped Joe figure out what Pharaoh's dream meant. But Pharaoh's dream was really more of a nightmare. It meant that everybody in Egypt would have food for 7 years, then be hungry for 7 years. Joe told Pharaoh the only way to survive was to store food during the 7 good years. Well, Pharaoh thought Joe's idea was brilliant. He put him in charge. During the 7 hungry years, nobody could eat without getting food from Joe. He was like a human vending machine. Well, remember how Joe had 11 brothers? Like everybody else, they had to get food from Joe. And when they came, they didn't even recognize their brother. But Joe knew who they were. He secretly tested them to see if they changed. After all, they did throw him in a pit and sell him. Finally, he couldn't hide who he was from his brothers anymore. He told everyone to leave the room because he was about to cry. After sobbing for a few minutes, he told them, "I'm your brother Joseph. I'm the one you sold." The brothers couldn't believe it. They had hurt Joe, but God had taken care of him during the good times and the bad. Even with everything they had done to Joe, he forgave them because he was willing to follow God, even when it was hard. Joe told them, "You planned to harm me, but God planned it for good." And God used Joe to save many lives, including the family that was part of God's special rescue plan. And that's the story of Joseph. So in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Joe was his dad's favorite. His brothers sold him. Potiphar put Joe in charge. Joe was sent to jail. The guard put Joe in charge. Pharaoh had a bad dream. Joe told him what it meant. Pharaoh put Joe in charge. Joe's brothers had to come to him for food. Joe forgave them. This was part of God's rescue plan. And that's a part of God's story.
That's such a powerful story. I can't believe Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. And then he got put into jail for something he didn't even do.
And you know what? I can't believe I don't have a coat like that. Do you know where I could get one? I think it would go great with my red ostrich cowboy boots.
Peter, focus.
Right. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, if anyone had a right to be angry, I mean, it was Joseph.
Yeah.
But he didn't lose hope. He knew God had a plan for him.
And not just him, but many other people around Joseph. Even though Joseph had a really hard upbringing, God brought him there to become a leader in Egypt and provide blessings for many nations through his leadership.
Yeah. Genesis 50, 19 through 20 talks about how Joseph responded to his brothers who needed food. It says, "But Joseph replied, 'Don't be afraid of me. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people.'" So Jess, what did you do when you were in the same situation as Julie?
Well, first, I just prayed about it. I asked God to show his plan to me. Eventually, I made new friends, I got involved in a new church, and it ultimately led me here. In fact, if I hadn't gone through that difficult situation all those years ago, we wouldn't be friends, and we wouldn't be doing the show right now.
Wow, you just blew my mind.
Right? And on top of that, I still keep in touch with my old friends from back home, and we even get together once in a while.
Yeah, you see, Julie, God can turn your difficult situation into something great. The enemy tried to destroy Joseph and leave him without hope. But Joseph had faith that God had a bigger plan. Let's make that our big idea for the week. Here, let's all say it together. I can have hope because God uses what the enemy meant for evil for his good.
So if you're ever facing a situation at home or at school that feels hopeless, ask your leaders to pray with you. And remember, God can use it for his good, and he will get you through it.
Yeah, that's good, Jess. But hey, that's our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining us on
The PB&J Show. Goodbye, guys.
See, if I wore the coat, if it's many colors,
It doesn't work.
it could.
It doesn't look good.
It totally
No.
could. It's totally good. I've been running
I
for it.
burned the shoes.